Welcome to Up on Blocks, a pandemic edition of Wheels Along the Road, presented for the Boyertown Museum of Historic Vehicles. I'm Sam Fiorani, and today we'll be discussing the 1966 Duesenberg. Fred Duesenberg died in 1932 due to complications from an automobile accident. After the EL Cord empire crumbled, Augie Duesenberg and a few craftsmen assembled the final Duesenberg chassis in 1937. In 1947, Augie was engaged with Marshall Marx to assist in the Marx reemergence, which never progressed past the planning stage. His heart gave out in 1955, and Augie died at the age of 77. With the cachet of a name like Duesenberg, the story couldn't end there. Augie's son, Fritz Duesenberg, founded the Duesenberg Corporation in late 1963. Newspapers in January of 1964 reported that the design of the newest Duesenberg would be completed by February. An aluminum V8 would produce more than 500 horsepower from beneath the new car's hood. The body of this $9,500 luxury car would be a combination of aluminum and high-strength plastics. Features would include four-wheel disc brakes, independent torsion bar suspension, and fully adjustable shock absorbers. To raise the estimated $2 million necessary to produce such a car, a number of investors joined the corporation as officers. Mr. Duesenberg was initially named president. Milo N. Record was appointed secretary-treasurer, and George L. Diven was chosen as attorney. Once the financiers were on board, a prototype needed to be designed. Independent of the Indiana venture, Esquire magazine ran an article describing the potential styling of 1964 model year classic American marques had they survived. Virgil Exner illustrated the 1963 article. Exner had designed the 1938 Pontiac, 1939 to 1949 Studebakers, and the 1955 to 1962 Chryslers. Since leaving his post as vice president of styling for Chrysler, Exner formed Virgil M. Exner Incorporated, an independent design house. In November of 1964, Virgil Exner, a longtime fan of Duesenberg automobiles, was chosen to design the car. Exner and his son Virgil Jr. submitted 15 sketches to the executives at Duesenberg. These styling exercises borrowed ideas from contemporary American and European luxury cars, as well as classic pre-war Duesenberg. Lean, graceful, and elegant is how Exner described the final design. Reminiscent of the radiator shell of the Model J, the Exner Duesenberg wore a prominent chrome grille. Flanking the nearly 7-foot-long hood, elegantly curved front quarters gave the illusion of pre-war fenders with peaked leading edges and mock openings behind the wheels. The passenger compartment borrowed accents from Chryslers and Lincolns. With imperial-style door handles, the Continental-like suicide doors opened wide to an expansive interior. Overstuffed bench seats from front and rear were standard fare for American luxury cars of the mid-1960s. Rear quarters continued the tribute to the earlier Model J and SJ Duesenbergs with sweeping trailing lines. Jan Norby wrote in Car and Driver that by the time the preliminary sketches made production, the car would probably look something which George Barris's apprentice had done to a Chrysler Imperial. Car and Driver later responded to the classic Model SJ touches, saying the Duesenbergs would have kept up with the times. Norby agreed, stating the 1965 model would have no more in common with a 1935 SJ type than the 1965 Cadillac has with Cadillac 30 years ago. Once a design was chosen, the company shopped for a coach builder to assemble the car. According to Exner, the art of individual bodywork was lost in this country after the 30s. The search for the builder moved to Italy because of their experience and more favorable labor costs. Although Bertone had been mentioned in an earlier account of the car, Carrozzeria Ghia of Turin was selected. Engineering the vehicle for production became the next priority. Former Auburn Cord Duesenberg engineer Paul Farrago, having worked for Ghia, moved back to Turin to be the liaison between the Americans and the Italians. Sales literature arrogantly stated, perhaps no other automobile ever produced achieved the standards of motoring excellence and elegance as the original Duesenberg. The new Duesenberg surpasses those standards. The design and features of the new car would bring the Model D, as it had been called in the press, up to the standards set forth by the company's sales catalog. Riding on a wheelbase of more than 137 inches and with an overall length of nearly 245 inches, the 1967 Duesenberg would become the largest regular production car in the world. 12-inch disc brakes at each corner stopped this 5,700-pound car. Firestone designed and built new 8.9 by 15-inch tires and twin 18-gallon gas tanks exclusively for the Duesenberg. Full instrumentation, including a tachometer and separate gauges for each fuel tank, and an extensive list of standard equipment, placed this car on a level a notch or two above the typical luxury car. Power for the new car came from a specially tuned Chrysler drivetrain. Although the prototype featured a standard 440 cubic inch V8 producing 350 horsepower, the production model was to use a modified version of that engine with 426 Hemi cylinder heads, generating 425 horsepower, although Special Interest Autos reported in February of 1983 that the car was to have a 426 cubic inch engine instead of the 440. A Chrysler 3-speed torque-flight transmission transferred the power to the rear wheels. By the time the Ghia-bodied car was introduced at 10 a.m. March 28, 1966, in the Cole Porter room of the Indianapolis Sheraton Lincoln Hotel, the company claimed that the first model's year's production was sold out. Without ever seeing a prototype, chewing gum magnate Philip K. Wrigley ordered the first car to roll off the assembly line. Other early orders included a Florida cattle rancher, a Houston oil man, the American importer of Lowenbrau beer, and the chairman of the Milwaukee's Ampco Metals. The Indianapolis newspaper, The News, reported that other orders came from persons who told Duesenberg officials that they didn't have a dime during the Depression in the 1930s, but fortune had smiled upon them since, and they now are financially stable to buy a Ducey, hoping to fulfill a childhood dream. Fortune had to have been very kind to prospective buyers in 1966. The introductory price had risen $10,000 from the previously announced price to $19,000, about the price of one of the 400 remaining original Duesenbergs would sell for at that time. A deposit of $1,000 was needed to secure production of a new Duesenberg. 60 days before delivery, a second payment of $4,000 was expected. Upon delivery, the final $14,500 was paid. All prices were at the factory in Indianapolis. The car would be shipped from Italy to the final assembly plant on the corner of 79th and Zionville Road in Indianapolis for installation of the powertrain and suspension. Although the groundbreaking was held on January 27, 1966, on the 88-acre parcel of land, the factory was never built. The materials to build the factory were delivered in the summer of 1965 and were untouched a year later. By July of 1966, the $20,000 bill for those materials had not been paid. The supplier, when asked about the overdue payments, said, "We're going to grab the material and to hell with them." An unnamed Los Angeles group mentioned the desire to buy the Duesenberg Corporation in the summer of 1966, when the financial troubles first became public knowledge. Virgil Exner and his son had not been paid for their work on the car, but agreed to future royalty payments. Bozell and Jacobs, the public relations firm in charge of the Duesenberg's publicity, was owed $17,000. Record, the company's vice president, posted the automaker's cash need at an additional $2.5 million to cover the continuation of the project. If investments totaling that sum were not found by October, the company said the California firm would be allowed to purchase Duesenberg. Fritz Duesenberg's problems with alcohol contributed to the downfall of this revival of the famed mark. The company slowly closed its doors as the funding dried up. The factory never proceeded past the groundbreaking. The Los Angeles firm's purchase of Duesenberg never materialized. Closure came when the prototype, the only car built by the Duesenberg Corporation, was sold at Boston's Park Burnett auctions in May of 1968. Television antenna manufacturer Harry Resnick purchased the car for $37,500 to add to his 60-car collection. He later sold the car to Sam Schwartz of Long Island. In a 1982 interview with Ken Gross, Schwartz said that although he admired the car, for all intents and purposes, it's a dolled-up Imperial, not a classic air. His car is on permanent loan at the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Museum in Indiana. Duesenberg remains a part of American automotive history. Like post-war Cadillacs and Lincolns and Packards, and the Duesenberg would have lost its flair and status had it survived the Depression era. In the 1940s, Marshall Merckx tried. In the 1960s, Fritz Duesenberg tried. Even though Harlan and Kenneth Duesenberg tried again in the 1970s, all of this effort may just prove that the concept of the Duesenberg is one whose time has come and gone. Thanks to the efforts of the team in Indianapolis, we have proof of one last valiant attempt to revive the flame. Oh, but what could have been an era where it could have been said that all new Duesenbergs had been bodied in Europe.